Hello, my name is Brant, B-R-A-N-T, Hunt, H-U-N-T. My channel is simply called Discerning What is True. What I do here is pursuing what I call reading certain spiritual books, esoteric works, Kabbalah, um, the Bible. Not literally, though. We look at it differently. I've had interviews with Phil Langdon for the last probably 2 to 3 years, live. Talked off record. That is, we don't always have recordings, although most of them are. That's what we do. He has had ascension in his life, and so that's what I'm pursuing in my own life. So that's why I pursue this. And so, anyway, again, we'll get into the reading tonight, simply called Possession, chapter 46. The upper worlds of existence are seen as different kinds of reality in their own right. So, right, many mystics have described their topology and dynamics in great detail. The esoteric tradition of Tibet and Mexico, as well as those of Europe, the Middle East, and India, share similar views of these higher realms, which indicates that they are objective phenomena. Carl Jung found similar accounts of these non-physical worlds both in the mythology of widely varied cultures and in the dreams and visions of many people. Remember that Carl Jung would actually have people who would talk about their dreams, what they were, and he was trying to figure out what was going on within themselves. So in Kabbalah, the reality of these worlds is accepted. This is not accepted in other perspectives out there, not in the science world, and definitely not in the religion world. So but this has been around a long time. Kabbalah has been around for thousands and thousands of years, and most people are not aware of it. I doubt there's maybe 2% of people, maybe 3, something of that nature. Even if that's a good number, but most people have not researched it either. So that's why me and Phil are here. However, what is of particular interest to us are the many observations of the inhabitants who were called Malakan and Shadum, or angels and devils. If we consider that the psyche is a Yazara organism, we must differentiate between what is subjective and what is objective. Remember, the subjective is always what we call can have biases in there. Okay, so religion itself is what we call a very subjective subject, while objective would be more in line with what we call science. But we could even say that that's not always all the time, although we can look at the areas of physics and math that are far more logical than being objective. The objective is what resides in the collective unconscious and is common to all of humanity. The subjective elements are all those things that have passed through an individual ego to be stored in the personal unconscious. So here we go. He's pointing out here, right here, that the ego itself he's saying this is to do with what we call the personal unconsciousness of someone. Okay. As such, these members have a very subjective flavor according to the psychological type of the person, their stage of development, and the way they accept or reject the experiences they have had. The collective element is quite different in that it is too deeply buried to be greatly influenced by the ego level. The instance of this is the universal belief in nature's spirit. I should say nature's spirits, although they may be called by 1,000 different names all over the world. The fact that the so-called educated do not believe in them does not make them disappear. This division of the psyche into objective and subjective areas is crucial, as it explains many things that some psychologists find disturbing because they cannot go beyond their mechanized view of the psyche. In other words, they can only go so far in what they've been taught or their own so-called biases themselves, you see. Carl Jung saw the objective aspect of the psyche as the realm of the archetypes. Some of these were cosmic in scale and others more psychological. This was the difference between the collective and the personal levels. He also perceived that beside the symbolic elements, there were many minor archetypes that were entitled in their own right. Some of these were related to the split off elements of a person's psyche, and some were not. In the normal psyche, one that is relatively balanced, the archetypes play a remote role in the individual life. The pattern of a love affair turning into a courtship and then moving on towards marriage is a natural progression of archetypes at work. Each partner is stimulated to make a reciprocal response to the other as anima and animus pass through the various stages of physical and psychological reaction and fusion before both enter into the universal archetype of a marital, or what we call a union, being married. In most cases, the archetype works through the personal unconsciousness, and each party feels that they are caught up in something bigger than both of them, which indeed they are. Choice, however, is never lost, and many prospective brides and grooms have backed out of the seemingly inedible process before it was completed. The reasons may be real or fantasy, but the individual has the power to accept or decline to go on, which someone who is possessed by an archetype has not. Such people are ruled by a principle, be it preoccupation with money or their mother, a total identification with their job, or the idea that they are Attila the Hun. Here, there is no question of choice. They, quote, unquote, are that preoccupation, often so much so that they lose the vulnerability of the rest of humanity and become like ciphers of their ruling passion or ideas, like Napoleon, who became caricature of himself as emperor of the French. The same thing can occur to a tax inspector who is so identified with his task and he puts the Spanish Inquisition to shame. This kind of possession has been touched upon, but here we are going to look at it in a slightly different way in order to see that it is not always just a malfunction of the psyche, but something intrusive and alien. Carl Jung saw many of the old gods of the mythology as projections of archetypes in the psyche. Kabbalah, however, goes further and states that the upper worlds not only contain symbolized principles at work, but have actually objective entities who live their lives as we do, but in those other realities. These were referred to in many texts as good and evil spirits. The idea that such creatures exist was quite common in the West until the Industrial Revolution. In recent years, there has been renewed interest in such things, perhaps as a reaction against technology. Kabbalah saw these inhabitants of the upper worlds as creatures going about their business rather like people and animals do in the physical world. However, besides the goblins and fairies, and some see them, there are human entities who are without bodies. This may be because they have just died or because they cannot leave the lower level of Zara. The reason for this might be that they cannot accept the fact that they are dead, or that they prefer to stay there between the worlds in the hope that they might be able to find a new body without going through the post-mortem and prenatal processes. A few traditions say, wonder about looking for someone living to whom to attach themselves. These were known as Dibbukim. Sorry, I'll just spell it for you. Dibbukim, Dibbukim. I think that's how to pronounce it. Who sought to take possession of weak or unbalanced psyches so that they could retain some contact with life on Earth. Psychologists have called the phenomenon of two or more identities within one body, quote, multiple personalities, end quote. While this may be the case in certain individuals with fragmented psyches, it is not always so. Sometimes what takes over the psyche is not just in shadow or even a recognizable archetype, like the seductress or miser, but a distinct character with decidedly different qualities from the patient. An example of this was the man who disappeared from his home for many months and turned up many miles away in a new town with a new name, having started a completely new way of life. Then suddenly he, quote, woke up, end quote. took possession of himself again and returned to where he had come from. This was no ordinary psychotic episode, for he appeared to be quite normal in both personalities. Figure 47, called possession. The ancient and medieval world accepted the notion that disembodied psyches could take over a weakly defended incarnated mind. The so-called, quote, age of reason and science denied life after death. But some modern long experienced psychiatrists recognize an alien element in some of their patients that was not a dominant subpersonality. In Kabbalah, this phenomenon is known as, I'm going to spell it again for you, D-Y-B-B-U-K, Daibak. The discarnated entity is usually a person who does not recognize that they are dead. They are stuck in a unresolved problem or wish to return to life without going through the post-mortem process. Occasionally, some entities who are evil wish to damage the possessed mind out of sheer malice. This is from Blue Beard, the Homicide, 19th century engraving. From a scientific viewpoint, the concept of a discarnate entity entering the psyche and taking over is medieval. Here we have a modern subjection reaction when confronted with what is not contained within the current paradigm. When the Age of Reason destroyed the ancient picture of a multi-level interacting universe, the upper worlds were lost from view. Fortunately, those like Jung, who were not closed to such dimensions, saw beyond the physical and opened up the Western mind to the universal dimensions again. Many who have continued his work have begun to recognize that what the ancients said was not untrue. Indeed, Carl Jung saw many of these phenomena, which are spoken about in alchemy and Kabbalah, manifest in the consulting room and psychiatric hospitals, so that the notion of entities and possession are no longer regarded or just imaginations. Indeed, one quite eminent physician confessed in private that he was acutely aware of, in his own case, quite benign entities aiding him in his work. Not all entities are sinister. Returning to the theme of gods and demons, Kabbalah speaks of each individual having an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, urging the person to follow their good or evil impulses. The idea that the tree has its shadow side is quite compatible with the notion that any one of the Sephiroth or triads or paths can malfunction and produce a negative or demonic effect. This is observed in the cruel warrior or afflicted Jirah, or the unscrupulous trickster of Hod, who cannot but cheat and the oppressive lawyer Belial is seen in the hanging judge. Less spectacular devils come in the form of certain attitudes have always condemn or negate both oneself and others as an idea of emotional experience that block out any insights. Likewise, distorted complexes can disrupt harmonious constellations of concepts, so that there is an internal battle between the angels and the devils within the psyche. The problem of devils or intruders which plague the psyche is not just confined to distorted, disturbed, or mad. It has particular meaning to those who wish to develop further inwardly and who begin to go beyond the place of the self at temporal. But there is a counter movement to hold them back. This was called by one sage as the, quote, rising up of evil, end quote. Got to get a little bit of water here. We have already spoken of the shadow, the devil, and the Lucifer principle, but what is now encountered is peculiar to the person who has reached and established a contact with the self at temporal. Here, the sense of achievement that acquired attracts the tempter, who sometimes offers many benefits as quite reasonable seeming terms. Such a moment often comes when it is least expected. Satan will set up an inner or outer situation which all the shadow side of the psyche is encouraged to undermine and yet exploit all the gains of years of work. This might be the belief that illumination makes one special, or that the ability to see what others do not make one superior. Many people on the path have been possessed by their own sense of self-importance, and not a few have fallen because they were seduced by their own charisma. Here's more. Here it must be remembered that according to Kabbalah, the self has three distinct components. If the Keter of the body, or the temporal of the psyche, and the Makut of the spirit are separated, now in parentheses, and this can happen by design or neglect, in parentheses. This split can allow the archetype of any of those levels to take possession of the person. This is why the intelligent insane often have such remarkable faces like biblical characters. They are intemporal, but there is no connection between earth and heaven. Their delusions of grandeur are centered in the archetype realm of Zara, which is full of all that can be imagined by a self-possessed mind. Being neither under the spiritual law of Bariah or the restraints of Assyria, reality they live, half disembodied in bemused blitz or agony betwixt the worlds. Satan the tempter opposes the self so as to prevent any unbalanced or unworthy person from proceeding further for beyond that point in what all traditions call the, quote, way, end quote. In Kabbalah, this stretches up from the self to the place where the three worlds meet. As such, this path is the Hebrew letter Het, H-E-T, which means ah, end quote. Here's where the process, I should say, Jung called, quote, individualization, end quote, takes on a new dimension as it unifies the three aspects of the self and enters the spiritual kingdom of Bariah. Let us look at the individualization more closely. And that is the end of chapter 46. So thank you for being here. Appreciate you listening. Hope that you're gleaning some wisdom here. This is not my words. These are strictly from, I was told about this works through Phil Langdon. Although it came through this particular book here, and I chose to pursue this area of psychology because I know very little about psychology. I know something of it, but very little of it. So part of it here is a learning experience for me. You see. So thank you for being here. And let's go back in here. Let's see. So thank you again, and I wish you a good evening. You take care.